October 3, 2009, a rainy Saturday in downtown Baltimore. By 6:45 p.m., most of the after-work crowd had cleared from the subway station on Calvert and Red. The platform was nearly empty. No rush hour noise, no tourists, just the hum of lights and the occasional echo of far-off brakes. At 6:53 p.m., surveillance footage showed a teenage girl stepping through the turnstiles. She was alone, dressed in a navy windbreaker and jeans, holding a phone in her right hand and a backpack slung over her left shoulder. Her name was Layla Brooks, 17 years old, a senior at Patterson High. She paused by the edge of the platform, glanced up at the digital train arrival sign, then sat down on the metal bench beneath the main camera's line of sight. That was the last confirmed image anyone would ever see of her alive. The train she was waiting for, the northbound Red Line, arrived at 7:06 p.m. The conductor later told police he didn't notice anyone, fitting Layla's description board that evening. He remembered a man in a bright yellow vest and a woman pushing a stroller. But no teen girl sitting alone. Investigators played the footage from multiple angles, multiple times. One camera caught Layla walking toward the bench. Another picked up the train doors opening and closing, but none ever captured her leaving. At 9:12 p.m., two transit security officers did a routine sweep. They noted the platform was empty, except for a zipped navy backpack placed neatly on the bench. Inside, a half-empty water bottle, two notebooks, one novel, and a sealed envelope with no writing on it. Her phone wasn't there. Neither was her wallet. They assumed it was left behind by someone who'd already boarded. The bag was placed in the lost and found. No report was filed. At 10:37 p.m., Layla's mother, Vanessa Brooks, called the police. Her daughter hadn't returned home from her SAT prep class. She wasn't answering her phone. She hadn't checked in since that afternoon. The dispatcher logged the call as a possible runaway, standard protocol, especially for teenagers. Vanessa insisted her daughter wasn't that kind of kid. Honor roll. Never late, always called. Something's wrong, she told them. She's not the type to just leave. By midnight, a patrol officer knocked on Vanessa's door. He asked a few questions, said maybe Layla had gone to a friend's house. Maybe she was upset about something and needed space. No signs of struggle. No Amber Alert, no search party. The official status? Layla Brooks was a presumed voluntary runaway. Within hours, her photo would quietly join the backlog of missing youth cases that rarely made the news. But to those who knew her, teachers, friends, neighbors, the idea didn't fit. Layla wasn't impulsive. She didn't drink. She didn't sneak out. She had a part-time job at a daycare and dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse. The last person to see her in person was her SAT instructor, Mr. Chavez, who said she stayed late after class to go over a math problem. She left at 6:10 p.m., caught the bus downtown, and texted her mom at 6:34. Almost there. Train's late again, LOL. That was the last message her phone ever sent. The next morning, the Brooks family returned to the station. Vanessa walked the entire platform, calling out her daughter's name. She asked the station staff to check the cameras again. That's when someone finally reviewed the footage closely. They saw Layla walk in. They never saw her leave. Police reopened the case. Detectives focused first on the possibility of voluntary disappearance. They questioned classmates, teachers, and her ex-boyfriend, a quiet boy named Malik, who said they hadn't spoken in weeks. Her social media had no red flags, no long posts, no signs of depression or planning. The sealed envelope found in her backpack was turned over for analysis. It contained a single sheet of paper, a hand-drawn map of the subway station. On it, a red X marked a stairwell near the maintenance corridor, a stairwell that didn't appear on public blueprints. When officers checked it, they found the gate welded shut. Transit authorities claimed the stairwell hadn't been in use since the early 1990s. It led to a maintenance tunnel no longer active, but no one could say exactly when or why it had been sealed. No fingerprints were found on the stairwell gate. No prints on the map. No DNA under the bag's zippers. The case hit a wall almost immediately. Layla's school held a candlelight vigil 2 weeks later. Flyers went up. Local news aired short segments. But without new evidence, interest faded. Online forums speculated trafficking, mental break, suicide. But none of it sat right with those closest to her. Her older brother Marcus would later say, "She wasn't lost. They lost her." There's a difference. By November, detectives reassigned the case to the Cold Files unit. The bench where she left her bag was replaced. The station repainted. A small plaque with her name, unofficial, was glued behind a column near where she sat. It was removed 6 months later during routine cleaning. For 15 years, her mother visited that platform every October, sat on the bench if it was free, lit a candle, held her daughter's photo, always looking down the tunnel, always waiting. What no one knew then, not police, not the family, not the thousands who passed through that station each week, was that something had been buried deeper than any of them realized. Something that would take years, a second investigation, and one overlooked clue to finally surface. And when it did, it would change everything they thought they knew about the night Layla disappeared. In the days that followed Layla's disappearance, detectives combed through the subway station frame by frame. The initial shock of a teenager vanishing in the middle of a public space had worn into a cold determination, but the footage offered more questions than answers. 4 cameras should have covered the entire platform from different angles. 2 of them had been mysteriously inactive that night, one claiming a wiring issue, the other logged as undergoing routine maintenance. The coincidence troubled investigators, but there was no evidence to suggest sabotage. Officially, it was marked as equipment failure. Unofficially, it left a gaping blind spot, just large enough to swallow a 17-year-old girl, without anyone seeing how. Detectives interviewed transit staff who worked that evening. Conductors reported nothing unusual. Ticketing clerks remembered no incidents. But a janitor on the midnight shift gave a hesitant account. He recalled seeing a girl near the service tunnel stairwell around the time Layla would have been waiting for her train. She wasn't alone. He said she was speaking with a man in a grey hoodie, though he couldn't be sure if it was an argument or just a conversation. The girl seemed agitated, moving her hands sharply, but the janitor admitted he only saw them briefly as he was pushing his cart. He didn't step closer. He couldn't confirm the girl's identity, and with no recording from the broken cameras, there was nothing to back his words. The stairwell he mentioned matched the spot marked with an X on the map found in Layla's backpack. By the time detectives searched it, the gate was locked and welded, dust and rust sealing the hinges. They pressed the janitor for more detail. Did the man look old, young, white, black? The janitor only shrugged. "Could have been anybody," he said. "That place is always full of shadows." His uncertainty frustrated the family, who begged investigators to consider that Layla had been lured away. But without concrete evidence of an abduction, the police leaned toward the runaway theory. They combed through her school locker, her bedroom, her online history. No signs of planning, no notes, no suspicious messages. The only unusual detail was the missing cell phone, which pinged once more at 7:18 p.m. near the same station before going dark. By technical standards, nothing proved a crime had occurred. A missing teen with no struggle, no witnesses, and no physical trace did not meet the threshold for foul play. Her family resisted the label from the start. Vanessa Brooks, her mother, told every reporter she could reach that her daughter was not the type to disappear voluntarily. "She left her bag zipped, her books neatly inside," she said. "If Layla wanted to leave, she would have taken them with her. She wasn't careless. She was precise." That wasn't her walking away. That was her being taken. Her words struck a chord with neighbors and teachers who described Layla as steady, serious, and reliable. But to detectives swamped with dozens of youth disappearances every year, the case looked indistinguishable from countless others that began with panic and ended with a quiet return weeks later. When Layla did not return, and no ransom call came, the urgency waned. Within 2 weeks, the case was officially suspended. Flyers faded on telephone poles. The nightly vigils dwindled. The local paper ran a half-column update buried on page 6. To the outside world, Layla had simply joined the invisible current of thousands of missing children whose names appear once and then vanish. Inside the Brooks household, the absence was louder than any headline. Her room remained untouched, bed still made from the morning she left. Her younger brother avoided the subway entirely, convinced the place itself had swallowed her. Friends stopped by at first, bringing food, sharing memories, but as the days stretched on, even they struggled to keep hope alive. Every unanswered call to her cell phone, every voicemail that rang to silence, carved deeper into the family's certainty that something terrible had happened. The detective assigned to the case, Mark Holcomb, admitted years later that he carried unease about closing it so quickly. He remembered the janitor's uncertain testimony, the broken cameras, the welded stairwell. It didn't add up, he said. But when you don't have physical evidence, it's like trying to hold smoke. He filed the report as an unresolved runaway, but the details never left his mind. The Brooks family never accepted the classification. Vanessa went on television, demanding accountability, demanding her daughter's case be treated like a crime. If it were your daughter, would you say she ran away because you couldn't find her on tape? She asked. But without leverage, without new leads, her voice was drowned out by the endless churn of other tragedies filling the news cycle. By the first anniversary, the case had already gone cold. The backpack sat in storage. The map was logged as inconclusive. The welded stairwell was forgotten. Even the janitor's statement slipped into obscurity, buried among routine testimonies that never made trial. On paper, there was nothing to investigate. A girl walked into a subway station and never came out. That was the official story. But those who had stood on that platform, her mother, her brother, her teachers, insisted otherwise. They knew her habits, her patterns, the small details that proved she hadn't chosen to leave. They pointed to the malfunctioning cameras, the missing phone, the unknown man in the grey hoodie. Pieces that didn't vanish, only lay waiting. Pieces that would resurface years later, long after the file was stamped and forgotten. When one overlooked detail forced the entire city to reopen a story it thought was closed. For now, though, silence filled the station. Silence and an empty bench where a girl once sat, waiting for a train that came and left without her. The backpack was the one item investigators could hold on to, the only piece of physical evidence that belonged unquestionably to Layla Brooks. It was navy blue, standard size, with faint scuff marks at the bottom corners and a zipper pull slightly bent out of shape. Found sitting neatly on the platform bench, it didn't look abandoned in haste. It looked placed. Inside, detectives expected the normal belongings of a high school senior on her way home from class. But when they opened it, the contents only deepened the mystery. There was no wallet, no cell phone. Both items Layla carried every day, both absent now. What remained was strangely curated. 2 school notebooks, one filled with algebra notes, the other nearly empty. A paperback novel with the first 100 pages dog-eared, but no bookmark. And at the bottom, tucked into the smallest pouch, a sealed envelope with no writing on its face. No address, no name. Just plain white paper folded once and pressed flat. When detectives slit it open, they expected a letter. Instead, they unfolded a crude map, hand-drawn in black ink. The rough outline matched the subway station, ticket booths, stairwells, platforms, even approximate placements of vending machines and benches. Toward the bottom right corner, a small service stairwell had been marked with a heavy red X. The sketch was unsettling in its precision, as if someone had memorized the station's bones. The paper contained no fingerprints, no smudges, no clear identifiers. It looked deliberate, like it had been left to be found. At first, investigators dismissed it as the doodle of a distracted teenager. Maybe Layla had drawn it while waiting in class. Maybe the X was a private symbol, something with no real-world connection. But when compared against old station plans, the mark aligned with a stairwell no longer in public use. That stairwell had been sealed years earlier, its gate locked with iron bars. By the time officers searched it, weeks had passed since Layla's disappearance. The stairwell was welded shut, thick seams of metal over the hinges, dust layering the floor. To all appearances, no one had entered it in years. The discovery was logged, photographed, then quietly shelved. The official notes read, "No sign of entry, area secured, not relevant." Detectives moved on, pressing interviews with classmates and family instead. But the family clung to the map. To them, it was no coincidence that the one marked area was the same location a janitor had mentioned when describing a girl and a man in a grey hoodie. It was evidence, however incomplete, that Layla had not wandered away by choice. She had been near that stairwell. And whatever happened there, she hadn't made it back. Her mother studied the map until the edges frayed. She called it her proof, her anchor against the runaway narrative. "She was pointing at something," she told reporters. "She was trying to tell us where she went. You can't just ignore that. Police countered that there was no indication the map was hers. It could have been slipped into her bag by someone else. Without fingerprints or handwriting samples to link it to Layla, it was nothing more than an unexplained drawing. In the weeks that followed, detectives circled the same unanswered questions. If the map had meaning, why wasn't it labeled? Why would Layla carry it in a sealed envelope? And if someone else had planted it, what message were they trying to leave behind? Theories began to ripple among those who followed the case online. Some argued the red X was a lure, designed to misdirect police into wasting time on sealed areas. Others believed it was Layla's own desperate attempt to document something she had noticed, something important enough to hide in her bag. The welded stairwell itself told its own quiet story. Maintenance records showed it had been sealed in the early 1990s after a fire code inspection. Before that, it led to a lower-level access tunnel once used for equipment transfer. The tunnel was narrow, damp and unstable, eventually deemed unsafe for routine use. Still, station workers admitted it remained accessible for years through cut locks and unsecured gates, long before it was finally welded. It wasn't impossible that someone had used it in the years since. Detectives conducted a cursory inspection. They rattled the gate, shined flashlights into the cracks, tested the welds. Everything seemed solid. No fresh marks, no sign of tampering. And yet the timing gnawed at those closest to Layla. The map marked a sealed stairwell. The cameras covering that exact angle failed the night she vanished. And the one eyewitness had placed her near that same location. 3 separate threads, all pointing to the same place, dismissed in the official file as irrelevant. For Vanessa Brooks, the inconsistencies were unbearable. She began visiting the station herself, standing near the welded gate, staring through the small gaps as if sheer willpower could peel it open. "I felt like she was just behind it," she later said. "Like if I called loud enough, she'd answer." But there was never an answer. Only silence and the cold smell of rust. Police pressure dwindled as weeks turned to months. The backpack was boxed and shelved in evidence. The envelope and map filed under miscellaneous. When media attention moved on, the case lost momentum. Friends stopped asking questions. Reporters stopped calling. The investigation that had once carried urgency now sat still, with only a mother's insistence keeping it alive. But even buried in archives, evidence has a way of resurfacing. The bag that looked ordinary, the map no one could explain, the stairwell too sealed to matter, each detail waited quietly for the years to pass. And when they did, those pieces would emerge again, this time impossible to ignore. Every October, Vanessa Brooks returned to the station with a single candle and a photograph of her daughter. She always came on the 3rd, the night Layla had vanished. At first, people gathered with her. Family, friends, neighbors, even strangers who had read about the case in the papers. The first year drew dozens. Candles lined along the platform, prayers whispered into the tiled walls. By the 3rd year, the numbers shrank. By the 5th, it was just Vanessa, her brother Marcus, and a handful of Layla's old classmates. The cameras no longer came. The city had moved on. But Vanessa stayed, standing by the bench where her daughter's backpack had been found, repeating the same words each year. She didn't leave. Somebody took her. Layla would have turned 22 that year. Her mother imagined college applications, part-time jobs, maybe even a boyfriend she trusted enough to introduce at family dinners. Instead, all she had was an empty chair at home and a daughter's name that had faded from news headlines into a line on an unsolved case file. Vanessa's persistence became its own story, a woman unable to let go, refusing the silence the city offered her. Some admired her strength, others quietly pitied her, but she never missed a vigil. It was around the 5th anniversary that a small ripple stirred again. A podcast host named Darren West, known for covering cold cases and urban legends, received an email from a man claiming to be a retired subway worker. The man said not all of the tunnels beneath the station were shown on the public blueprints. Some were built during expansions in the 1970s and later sealed or repurposed. If she marked a stairwell, the man wrote, it wasn't for nothing. Those tunnels go deeper than you think. Darren reached out and after several recorded calls, aired an episode titled The Girl Below the City. The podcast revived interest almost overnight. Old listeners who had never heard of Layla's case were suddenly invested, combing through archived news reports, police summaries, and family statements. Darren described the missing cameras, the janitor's vague sighting, and most importantly, the hand-drawn map from Layla's backpack. He ended the episode with a theory. The X marked not a dead stairwell, but a forgotten access point to the older tunnel system. If true, it meant investigators had never searched all possible routes where she could have gone. The episode spread across social media, drawing new eyes to a case most had forgotten. Within weeks, a Reddit thread titled "Where Did Layla Go?" gained thousands of followers. Users began posting scans of old service plans they had unearthed from public records offices and transit archives. Among them were Blue Line expansion drafts from the mid-1970s, revealing routes no longer in use. One in particular traced directly under the spot marked with an X on Layla's map. The discovery electrified amateur sleuths. For the first time in years, the case felt alive again. Civilians debated theories late into the night. Some believed Layla had been led down to those tunnels by someone who knew the layout, perhaps the man in the grey hoodie. Others suggested she stumbled onto something she wasn't meant to see: illicit activity, hidden rooms, trafficking routes, and paid the price for noticing. Skeptics argued it was all coincidence. The stairwell was sealed, the tunnels abandoned, the map nothing more than a teenager's doodle. But the debate itself rekindled public memory. Vanessa watched the podcast episode through tears. For years, she had begged authorities to take the map seriously. Now strangers on the internet were doing what police had refused to. "They see her," she said in an interview. "They believe me." Encouraged, she joined the Reddit thread under a username that quickly became recognized, "Still Her Mother." She answered questions, shared details the public had never known. Like Layla's habit of sketching places she visited, her obsession with getting details right, her neat handwriting on math homework. To Vanessa, the map wasn't meaningless. It was her daughter leaving a message. Detectives, however, remained cautious. Officially, the case was still classified as a runaway. The department issued a short statement, warning against conspiracy theories and unsanctioned exploration of restricted subway areas. But privately, some officers admitted the attention forced them to dust off old files. The podcast had made them look negligent, and the public scrutiny could not be ignored. For the first time in years, copies of the blueprints circulated around the precinct. Younger detectives who had never worked the original case began asking questions their predecessors had long since stopped asking. Urban explorers started planning trips into the forgotten tunnels. Some had already ventured near them before, documenting graffiti, rats, and pools of stagnant water. But now they had a target: the tunnel beneath the marked stairwell. Online forums buzzed with anticipation, trading tips on entry points and warning of the dangers: collapsed ceilings, air thick with mold, and the ever-present risk of arrest. The more the authorities discouraged exploration, the more determined the community became. For Vanessa, the attention was bittersweet. She wanted answers, not spectacle. She feared reckless explorers disturbing evidence or getting hurt themselves. But she also knew the renewed pressure might finally force police to act. "They ignored her once," she told Darren in a follow-up interview. "If they ignore this too, they'll be admitting they don't want to know." By the end of that year, the case that had once been buried under silence was again whispered about in city cafes, discussed in dorm rooms, and picked apart in podcasts across the country. Each mention brought Layla back into the light, if only briefly, and with every passing day, the sense grew that something beneath the station remained untouched, something waiting to be uncovered, something that would not stay sealed forever. In early spring of 2015, 6 years after Layla Brooks vanished, the whispers online turned into action. A small group of urban explorers, armed with flashlights, respirators, and handheld cameras, managed to gain entry through a forgotten service hatch a block away from the station. The hatch had long been covered by a rusting metal plate, partially hidden by weeds and traffic noise, but someone on the Reddit thread had posted its location, claiming it lined up with the sealed Blue Line drafts. The explorers squeezed inside one by one, their voices echoing nervously as they dropped into a black corridor no one had walked in decades. Their footage, later uploaded to YouTube, began mundanely. Shots of damp walls, rotting wooden beams, graffiti from long-ago trespassers. Their laughter was nervous, their commentary shaky, the excitement of trespassing mixed with unease. But around the 12-minute mark, the tone shifted. The flashlight beams caught a phrase sprayed across a concrete wall in dripping red paint. "Help her." The letters were tall, smeared, as though drawn in haste. The group went quiet. One of them muttered, "Oh my God, that's her." The video glitched, the image shuddered, then cut to static. When it returned seconds later, the explorers were scrambling back toward the hatch, voices frantic, gasps echoing against the walls. The clip ended there. Within 24 hours, the video went viral. Forums exploded with speculation. Some swore the footage was faked for views, pointing out inconsistencies in the static and timing. Others insisted it was real, proof that the tunnels held the answer to what happened to Layla. The phrase "help her" became a rallying cry online, plastered across posts and profile banners. For Vanessa Brooks, watching from her kitchen table, it was both a gut punch and a lifeline. She froze the frame again and again, tracing the letters on her screen with shaking fingers. "That's her," she whispered. "That's her trying to talk." The virality forced the authorities to respond. Baltimore Transit Police issued a statement acknowledging the tunnel's existence, but warning that trespassing posed severe risks. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. The department had already taken heat for dismissing the case in 2009. Now, with millions watching, they couldn't afford another misstep. For the first time, a sanctioned investigation was launched. Officers, forensic teams, and engineers descended into the tunnels with professional equipment, maps, and respirators, determined to locate the graffiti and confirm its authenticity. What they found startled even the most skeptical. The "help her" message was real, painted in thick strokes of faded red spray paint, long dried into the wall. Beneath it, small scratches clawed into the concrete suggested someone had scraped desperately at the surface. Forensics confirmed the paint had been applied years earlier, not recently. This wasn't a hoax. Someone had written it when the tunnels were still active to intruders, possibly the very night Layla disappeared. The deeper the team pushed, the more unsettling the evidence became. Near a collapsed section of wall, an officer found a simple black hair tie half buried in dust. It was brittle, aged but intact. Vanessa recognized it immediately as the kind her daughter used to wear, wrapped twice around her ponytail every morning. DNA tests were inconclusive after so many years underground, but the possibility was enough to reopen the case formally. Then came the most chilling discovery. In a narrow alcove past the collapsed wall, wedged between debris, a small Polaroid photograph was recovered. Time had warped it, the edges curled and water-stained, but the image was still visible. It showed Layla, her jacket unmistakable, her hair pulled back, her expression tense but alive, and beside her stood a boy no one could identify, his face partly shadowed but distinct. He looked older than her, maybe in his 20s, eyes blank as if caught mid-blink. The photo electrified the investigation. Analysts dated the Polaroid film type to 2007-2009, consistent with the timeline of her disappearance. That meant it had likely been taken the night she vanished or soon after. But who had taken it? And who was the boy standing with her? Police released a sketch based on the image, asking the public for leads. Tips poured in, hundreds of calls claiming to know the boy, each one a dead end. For the Brooks family, the photograph was both agony and relief. It confirmed what they had said all along. Layla hadn't run away. She had been alive after stepping onto that platform. Someone had led her into the tunnels, and she hadn't been alone. Marcus stared at the photo for hours. "She's looking at something off-frame," he said. "Not the camera. Something else." His words haunted the family, raising the possibility that someone else had been in the room. Someone hidden just outside the shot. Investigators combed the tunnels for additional clues, cataloging every scrap of debris, every scrawl of graffiti. They found empty soda cans dating back decades, rusted tools, and the skeletal remains of rodents. But nothing else tied directly to Layla. The Polaroid remained the singular, irrefutable link. It proved her presence. It proved another person's presence. But it raised more questions than it answered. The viral video, the graffiti, the photograph, all of it reignited the case, but it also fractured the narrative. Some believed the boy in the photo was a fellow captive, another victim of the tunnels. Others theorized he was her abductor, posing with her like a trophy. A darker theory suggested she had joined him willingly, though her family rejected that notion outright. Vanessa clung to the image as proof her daughter had fought to be found. "She didn't go down there by choice," she told reporters. "But she left us signs. We just didn't look soon enough." As the investigation pressed deeper, one truth became unavoidable. The sealed tunnels were no longer forgotten. They were alive again in the public's imagination, corridors of rust and rot that carried the weight of a missing girl's final hours. And somewhere in those shadows, the photo suggested there was still someone else, someone the city had never accounted for. When the Polaroid surfaced, investigators sent it directly to forensic analysts specializing in aged photographs. They confirmed the film type had been discontinued in 2007, sold in limited quantities until existing stock disappeared from shelves. That narrowed the time frame sharply. Combined with Layla's unmistakable jacket, the same one she had been wearing on camera the night she vanished, analysts concluded the picture must have been taken the night she disappeared or within days. It wasn't an old snapshot or a coincidence. It was evidence from the heart of her disappearance. The boy beside her, however, was an enigma. He looked to be in his early 20s, thin face, sharp jawline, unkempt hair, his eyes caught half shut, frozen in an expression that made identification difficult. The shadow cast across his cheek obscured further detail, yet the image was clear enough to confirm he was no one already known to the family or Layla's circle of friends. He was someone else entirely. Detectives worked with digital artists to build a sketch from the Polaroid. They sharpened outlines, adjusted contrast, and filled gaps with estimations. The composite was released publicly, accompanied by a statement. "We believe this individual was with Layla the night she disappeared. We need the public's help identifying him." The sketch ricocheted across news stations, social media, and the same forums that had kept her case alive for years. Within days, dozens of tips poured in. Some claimed the boy was a missing kid from another state. Others swore he was a man who used to loiter near the subway in the mid-2000s. Each lead collapsed under scrutiny. Fingerprints, databases, missing persons reports, none matched. The boy remained a ghost. Then, quietly, a retired metro technician contacted the department. His name was withheld publicly, but he told investigators something chilling. He said he had seen that face before, not on television, not in the papers, but in the tunnels. Years earlier, during routine inspections, he had spotted a young man lingering in a restricted maintenance corridor. When he confronted him, the man bolted into the dark, vanishing through gaps in the old system. At the time, the technician brushed it off as another trespasser, an adrenaline seeker using the underground as a playground. He never reported it. "Didn't want to get involved," he admitted. But when he saw the sketch on the evening news, he froze. He was certain it was the same face. The revelation shifted the tone of the investigation. If the boy in the photo had been living in the tunnels, then Layla might have encountered him there, willingly or by force. The idea suggested something darker than a simple abduction. It hinted at someone who had made the tunnels his home, someone who had survived off-grid for years, unseen except in passing glimpses. For Layla's family, the knowledge was unbearable. The photograph was proof she hadn't left alone. But whether the boy was her captor or another lost soul like her, no one could say. And as the city stared at the frozen image of two young faces, one familiar and one unknown, the question deepened. Who took the photo in the first place? The sketch from the Polaroid spread across every channel of communication investigators could reach. Bulletin boards, missing persons networks, even international law enforcement databases. Yet nothing surfaced. No fingerprints. No DNA. No prior arrests. The boy in the photo with Layla did not exist in any official capacity. Police called him the unknown male, a sterile label that did little to ease the unease surrounding his presence. He was both there, undeniable in the photograph, and nowhere absent from every record they searched. Then, in a quiet corner of the case files, one detective noticed a detail that pulled the threads tighter. In 1995, 14 years before Layla vanished, a 6-year-old boy named Evan Furlong disappeared from a downtown shelter 2 miles from the very subway line where her backpack had been found. His file had long since gone cold, a grainy black-and-white photo all that remained of him in public archives. Side by side, the features aligned. The jaw, the wide-set eyes, even the cowlick in the hairline seemed to match. If Evan had survived unseen all those years, he would have been 20 by the time Layla disappeared. The same age estimate for the boy in the Polaroid. The possibility chilled everyone involved. Could a child who had vanished without a trace have grown up in the forgotten corners of the city, unseen and unaccounted for, only to reappear beside another missing teenager? Or was the resemblance just coincidence? Another false hope in a case built on uncertainties. Vanessa Brooks, staring at the Polaroid alongside the old shelter photo, felt her stomach twist. "He looks lost," she said softly, "like he's waiting for someone to tell him what to do." For her, the implication was almost unbearable. If her daughter had encountered Evan, had she been held by him, or had she tried to help him? The line between victim and survivor blurred into something crueler. Detectives pursued the lead with urgency. They contacted Evan's mother, long since relocated to another state. Shown the Polaroid, she broke down. "That's him," she whispered, though she admitted years and grief could play tricks on her memory. Forensic analysts compared bone structure and facial proportions between Evan's childhood photo and the Polaroid. Their report concluded it was highly probable the two images showed the same individual. But probability wasn't proof. Without DNA, the identity remained speculative. The theory raised disturbing questions. If Evan had been taken as a child, who had kept him hidden? How had he survived for nearly 15 years without surfacing in records, schools, or medical systems? Some investigators began to believe the tunnels themselves might have been more than just forgotten infrastructure. They might have been home to someone raised away from society. And if Evan had been that someone, then what did it mean for Layla? The debate fractured the task force. One side argued Layla had been abducted and held captive by Evan, who had grown into the role of aggressor. The other side pointed to the Polaroid, where her body language seemed guarded but not restrained, her gaze fixed on something outside the frame. Perhaps she had met Evan underground, a boy who had been lost long before her, and in her instinct to help had followed him into the darkness? If so, she may have been trapped not by force but by compassion, a decision that sealed her fate. For Vanessa, the second theory resonated painfully. She remembered Layla's nature, kind to a fault, always stepping in to defend classmates, volunteering hours at the daycare, even when she wasn't scheduled. If she thought someone needed her, Vanessa said, she wouldn't have left. She would have stayed even if it cost her. But cost what? That question hung in the air unanswered. The investigation into Evan's disappearance reopened, intertwining with Layla's in ways no one had anticipated. Police retraced old shelter records, staff logs, and witness statements from 1995. They found gaps. Reports that children had complained of a man visiting at night, a counselor who had quit abruptly and moved states. Leads that once seemed insignificant now loomed large. But decades later, most evidence was gone, washed away by time. In the public eye, the revelation only deepened fascination. Media headlines shifted from girl lost in subway to two cases. One photograph. Amateur sleuths built elaborate timelines online, weaving conspiracy theories about hidden communities, forgotten shelters, and children raised like ghosts. Others accused the police of fabricating connections to cover their own negligence. Yet the photograph remained, stubborn and unyielding. Two faces, one known, one maybe known. Two missing children separated by 14 years, now standing together in a place no one could identify. To investigators, it was both breakthrough and curse. The boy with no name finally had one, but his story raised more shadows than light, and for Vanessa Brooks it confirmed the one truth she had always believed. Layla hadn't vanished into nothing. She had gone somewhere with someone, and that meant there was still more to find. 15 years had passed when the discovery finally came. In March 2024, a routine maintenance project brought crews beneath Track 4 of the downtown station. The area had been sealed since 2010 after structural issues made it unsafe for workers. Dust and stagnant air coated the narrow crawl spaces, and for most of the men down there, it was just another day's job, reinforcing beams, replacing wiring, inspecting cracks. But near the back corner, wedged between two rusted support columns, one worker struck metal with his crowbar. At first, they thought it was debris left behind decades ago. Then they dragged it into the light. A locker corroded, its hinges fused with rust. It took nearly an hour to pry it open. Inside, they found objects that didn't belong in a maintenance space. The first was a waterlogged journal, its pages swollen, ink bleeding into blurred shapes. Next, fragments of dark clothing, thin and brittle, half disintegrated with age. And at the bottom, still glinting beneath layers of dust, a gold ring. Etched into the inner band were 2 letters, LB. When the discovery was reported, detectives moved quickly. The initials were an immediate jolt. They could only belong to one person. Vanessa Brooks was called to the station, shown the ring under an evidence lamp. She didn't need to read the engraving. "That's hers," she said, her voice breaking. It had been a 17th birthday gift from her, the kind of piece too sentimental for Layla to ever sell or give away. The fragments of clothing were analyzed next. Forensic labs compared the fibers to the hoodie captured in the grainy surveillance footage from 2009. The man the janitor had described near the sealed stairwell. The results came back with a match. Whoever had worn that hoodie had left part of it behind in the locker. It was the first physical confirmation that the shadowy figure was not an illusion of poor lighting, but a real person. Tied to the night Layla vanished. The journal, though almost destroyed, contained pieces that could still be read. Forensic specialists carefully separated the damp pages, drying them under controlled conditions. Most of the writing had dissolved into stains, but fragments emerged. Phrases like "dark for days" and "she said wait." One line chilled investigators. "He comes and goes. I don't." The handwriting was rough, inconsistent, but analysts leaned toward the possibility it wasn't Layla's. If true, someone else had kept it. Someone else had been there. The most shocking discovery came from the smallest detail. Underneath the jagged edge of a rusted nail inside the locker, technicians found traces of skin and dried blood. Modern DNA testing revealed it belonged to a male, recent enough to survive degradation, but not listed in any known database. No matches to criminal records, no missing persons, no family connections. It was a ghost profile, a strand of identity floating without a name. The implications were staggering. If the DNA belonged to the boy in the Polaroid, it meant he had survived long enough to leave this trace, years after Layla was gone. If it belonged to someone else, it suggested a third person had been in the tunnels, someone unrecorded, someone who still had not surfaced. News of the locker reignited the city's obsession with the case. Headlines screamed of the locker under track 4, television crews camped outside the station, and Vanessa's quiet vigils transformed into crowded memorials once again. Reporters demanded answers. Was this proof Layla had been held beneath the station? Did the hoodie fragments tie her abduction to a specific suspect? Why did the DNA lead nowhere? Detectives were careful with their words. Official statements confirmed the finds, but stopped short of conclusions. Off record, some admitted the evidence left them with more questions than ever. Who had placed the locker there and when? Was it a hiding place or a time capsule? And why had it gone unnoticed for so long, sitting just feet below the very platforms commuters used every day? For Vanessa, the discoveries were validation of everything she had fought for. "She didn't run away," she told a crowd gathered at the station entrance. "She was here, right here, the whole time." And they ignored her. The ring was returned to her under protective custody, and she wore it on a chain around her neck, refusing to take it off. The locker's contents forced investigators to confront a possibility they had avoided for years. Layla may not have been a single victim in isolation, but part of a pattern stretching across decades. The journal fragments hinted at multiple voices. The clothing tied back to the man in the hoodie, and the DNA suggested a living presence no one could yet identify. In the dim corridors beneath track 4, the echoes of footsteps lingered long after the search teams packed up. For the first time in 15 years, police admitted the case was not a runaway, not a dead file. It was an open investigation, and the city was finally forced to reckon with the truth that had waited all along, hidden beneath its busiest streets. The journal recovered from the locker under track 4 became the centerpiece of the reopened investigation. Forensic archivists worked carefully, peeling apart swollen pages that threatened to crumble with each touch. Most of the ink had bled into unreadable blots, words dissolving into ghosts of sentences. Yet here and there fragments survived, enough to form unsettling glimpses of whoever had once held the pen. The first legible lines were simple observations: Dark for days. Cold when trains above. Don't know how long. Later, the entries grew stranger, referring not to one person but two. She waits. She talks in whispers. Says someone will come. The handwriting shifted between frantic scrawls and oddly neat blocks, as though two different moods, or perhaps two different people, had written within the same book. One passage stood out for its disturbing clarity. She thought I was like her. But I wasn't locked in. That line alone reshaped the entire theory of what had happened to Layla. If she had been trapped, then someone else, maybe the boy in the Polaroid, had lived there by choice. Among the fragments was a repeated reference to the keeper. No name, no description, just the phrase etched again and again, sometimes capitalized, sometimes in lowercase, but always with a tone of fear. The keeper comes. The keeper leaves. He says don't follow. Investigators debated whether the keeper was real, a person who maintained control in the tunnels, or a delusion scribbled under duress. But the journal's tone carried weight. Whoever wrote it believed in the keeper, and in his power to decide who stayed and who left. Psychologists brought in to consult on the case floated a chilling theory. If the boy in the Polaroid was truly Evan Furlong, missing since 1995, he may have adapted to a subterranean existence over years of isolation. Children are resilient but also malleable. Raised in darkness, he could have learned to survive underground, forming his own sense of order and authority. To him, the keeper might have been a guardian or captor at first, but as he grew, he could have taken on the role himself. If Layla had encountered him, perhaps she mistook him for another victim. The line "she thought I was like her" suggested she believed they shared the same fate. But the author was clear, they did not. That possibility unsettled investigators deeply. Was the boy merely another victim turned survivor, hardened by years in the tunnels? Or had he become something worse, a lure drawing others in, repeating a cycle of captivity? It was impossible to know without identifying him, but the journal hinted at an unsettling dynamic. Not two captives together, but one captive and one keeper. The fragmentary nature of the journal left space for endless speculation. Online communities dissected every word, arguing over interpretations of the blurred handwriting. Some insisted multiple hands had written in it, pointing to changes in style. Others believed the boy was never a victim at all, but someone raised below ground from the beginning, with Layla stumbling into his world by accident. A darker camp argued the existence of a network, that the keeper was part of something larger, and the journal was only one thread in a woven pattern of disappearances. For Vanessa Brooks, the words landed like stones. She read the line again and again. She thought I was like her. But I wasn't locked in. She spoke to reporters after, her face hollow with grief. "That's my daughter," she said. That's who she was. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She tried to help someone else. And they took her for it. Her conviction never wavered. Layla's last act in her mother's eyes was compassion, and that compassion cost her everything. The discovery intensified the divide between official investigators and civilian sleuths. Detectives warned against assuming too much from partial evidence, but the public had already drawn its conclusions. To them, the journal was proof the police had missed critical evidence all along. Calls for accountability surged, demanding to know why the tunnels had never been fully searched in 2009, why the stairwell marked on Layla's map had been dismissed, why it had taken a group of explorers and a viral video to uncover what law enforcement should have found years earlier. Behind closed doors, even seasoned detectives admitted unease. The journal suggested something systematic, not random. Someone had been moving in and out of those tunnels long after they were declared sealed. Someone had been watching, keeping, controlling. And if they had allowed one person to stay unrestrained, it begged the question, how many others had been taken and how many never returned? Still, nothing in the journal provided a definitive answer about Layla's fate. No body, no direct confession, just fragments of thought left behind in waterlogged ink, pages that shouldn't exist but did. They painted a picture of a girl caught in a world below the city, alongside someone whose role shifted between companion and captor, a world ruled by a shadow called the Keeper, whether real or imagined. As the pages circulated among investigators, psychologists, and the public, one thing became certain. The case was no longer about a runaway teenager. It was about something hidden beneath the city, something that had swallowed children decades apart, leaving behind only fragments, a backpack, a ring, a photograph, and words that hinted at a truth too dark to fully grasp. And yet, they were all that remained of Layla's voice. By August of 2024, public pressure had reached a breaking point. After months of speculation about the locker, the journal, and the boy in the Polaroid, the city authorized a full ground-penetrating radar scan beneath the old subway station. Engineers expected to find little more than collapsed service corridors or voids left from long-abandoned expansions. Instead, the scan revealed something no one had anticipated: an entire sub-level directly beneath the platforms, undocumented on any modern blueprint. The chamber appeared sealed, inaccessible, as if intentionally erased from memory sometime in the 1980s. The discovery triggered a massive operation. Crews drilled carefully into the foundation, breaking through layers of concrete until a hidden stairwell emerged, choked with rubble and dust. Behind it, the forgotten platform stretched out like a frozen relic, crumbling tile, rusted rail, and the stale air of a place untouched for decades. It was there in the far corner beneath collapsed ceiling beams that searchers found what the Brooks family had feared and expected in equal measure: human remains. The skeleton was incomplete, but enough remained to give investigators pause. Clothing scraps clung to the bones, deteriorated beyond recognition, but one detail survived: a thin chain with a small pendant, warped but still identifiable. It belonged to Layla. Dental records confirmed what her mother had always known. After 15 years of vigils, speculation, and unanswered questions, Layla Brooks had been in the city all along, sealed away beneath the platform she had walked into as a teenager. The forensic timeline suggested she had lived for days, possibly weeks, after disappearing. The condition of her bones, faint traces of stress markers, and the position of her remains told a story of survival in impossible conditions. Darkness, hunger, waiting for a rescue that never came. For Vanessa, the knowledge was shattering. "She wasn't gone that night," she whispered. "She waited for us. And we didn't come, but Layla wasn't alone." Just a few feet away, tangled in the debris, investigators found a second skeleton, smaller, male, unidentified. His bones told a different story, younger at first glance, possibly in his late teens or early 20s when he died. No ID, no dental records to compare, no match in databases. For some, it was obvious. This was the boy in the Polaroid, the one believed to be Evan Furlong. Forensic experts couldn't prove it, but the possibility haunted everyone who had followed both cases. If it was Evan, then the two children who vanished 14 years apart had ended in the same place, their fates sealed together beneath the city. If it wasn't, then the mystery deepened even further. Another nameless life swallowed by the tunnels, another ghost with no story to claim him. The announcement sparked an outpouring of grief across the city. Candlelight vigils filled the streets near the station. Crowds gathered not only for Layla, but for the unnamed boy whose identity remained a blank line in official reports. For Vanessa, the closure was both a wound and a salve. Her daughter could finally be laid to rest. But the presence of the second body left her restless. "They were both missing," she said at the graveside. "Maybe he just wanted someone to remember him too." Investigators closed the case officially, listing Layla's cause of death as undetermined but consistent with entrapment. The boy remained John Doe, his bones boxed in evidence storage while analysts waited for DNA matches that never came. The tunnels were sealed once again, filled with concrete to prevent further exploration. But to those who had followed the story for years, the ending was no ending at all. Layla had been found, yes. But the questions lingered like echoes under the tracks. Who had taken the Polaroid? Who was the keeper mentioned in the journal? And how many others had disappeared into the city's forgotten underground, their stories erased by time and silence? For Vanessa Brooks, the truth was both devastating and unrelenting. Her daughter's compassion had led her to stay when others might have fled. She had tried to help someone, and in the end, they both vanished together, buried not just in earth but in the memory of a city that looked away for too long.